A listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Do you think people in the public eye are fair game when it comes to parody and satire?
Yes, 100%.
Well, it depends what the parody and satire is about.
I think yes and no. I think if you're in the public space, obviously you're open to be made fun of, to be part of the joke, to be part of the culture. But then I also think, you are able to put in boundaries.
Parody is not necessarily like bullying or abusing. It's sort of you're taking things that are on the public knowledge and turning it into entertainment. There's no problem with that.
I mean, that's the whole point. Like, what else are we going to make parody and satires about?
I don't think anyone's fair game to be made fun of.
No, I think they're open for the world to make many opinions about freedom of speech.
It's a question that's in the spotlight following reports that Raygun's legal team had a parody musical on her journey to the Paris Olympics cancelled ahead of its trial show. Raygun, the musical, a creation of Aussie comedian Steph Broadbridge, was set to debut in Sydney over the weekend. But on Saturday night, instead of taking to the stage, the comic took to Instagram, posting this.
My trial show tonight for Raygun the musical has been cancelled. Raygun's lawyers got in touch with the venue and threatened legal action, so we will be refunding everyone their $10 or comp ticket back.
She went on to say it was because the breakdancers' legal team had personal branding and trademarking concerns. And according to subsequent interviews with Broadbridge, as well as statements from Rachael Gunn's management, a cease and desist was issued and legal action threatened in a bid to protect the 37-year-old's strong and respected brand. That's a quote there.
Oh, okay. It's a bit of a stretch calling it a brand, but
If you could make fun of yourself, especially in Australian culture, I think we like that more than putting your foot down and saying, no, don't make fun of me.
I think she's hurt her own reputation more by, bringing in legal teams to shut it down.
She was really a nobody before the Olympics. So I can understand it's a bit different if a football player of any code, where I think the rule would be, no, screw it. You're high profile enough. It's fine. It's fair game.
I understand where she's coming from. I know she cops so much hate. And, if I was in her position, I probably wouldn't want that musical to go ahead.
Jimmy Fallon did the dance, and when she did her interview with The Project, like a couple of weeks after, she was saying that she felt like it was a compliment that happened. So I don't know what the difference is.
Let funny stuff be funny stuff and long live Raygun.
But isn't parody and satire, in a legal sense, protected from this kind of action? And how have countless other examples of parodied famous faces been able to get a run in the past? Jahan Kalantar is a solicitor and managing partner at Executive Law Group. Jahan, welcome back to The Briefing.
Thank you so much for having me.
For those unfamiliar, what exactly is a cease and desist and what weight does it carry?
So a cease and desist is a letter basically from a legal practitioner to an entity saying, hey, what you're doing is inappropriate for reasons XYZ. We insist that you stop it. And if you don't stop it, we may take legal action against you. That might be seeking damages. It might be a whole bunch of things. But it's basically putting people on notice that you are doing something that we say is unlawful and you need to stop it.
And how legally binding are those documents?
Look, you can always issue a cease and desist and not take any further follow-up steps. It could be an invitation for someone to enter into a dialogue with you. It's not necessarily binding, but I always take the view that it's like pointing a loaded gun at someone. You better be ready to fire. Like if you send off a cease and desist, if you send a letter of demand, you better be ready to see this all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we haven't seen the cease and desist. You haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. But from what we've understood in reports, the show's promoter told the ABC that Raygun's team threatened to take the production to court, quote, tomorrow if they didn't pull the show. How realistic is a threat like that?
Yeah, it's quite realistic. There's a weapon in the legal system called an injunction. And an injunction's kind of like the nuclear bomb. It's when you go to a court and say, this person's about to do X, Y, Z, and in doing X, Y, Z, they are going to change the landscape forever. And so they should not be allowed to do X, Y, Z until we figure that out. And you can basically stop someone from doing something for a period of time until the court determines whether that is or is not unlawful. So it's absolutely something that could happen.
Let's talk about some of the statements from Raygun's management, and they list a few areas of concern with the musical. They've mentioned misuse of intellectual property. They've spoken about violations of creative rights and integrity of work, potential trademark infringements in using the name Raygun, and the last area, which has caught a lot of people's interest, is protecting a strong and respected brand. With that big list, what avenues of law do these open up?
So essentially what they've done is said, look, the possible breaches that you will do by doing this musical, because I imagine they haven't seen the musical, they probably don't have the book of the musical, maybe they have, but it's saying we think, based on everything that you've advertised to the world at large, these are the things that are likely to be a problem with your musical. So what they're trying to do is get on the front foot. And in doing so, they've really opened up a dialogue around all of these issues. I mean, parody is protected. It's one of the specific protections under basically this area of law. And there's an articulation under the law that you can take a piece of work and make something different to it that makes fun of it in some way, lighthearted or otherwise, and that's not necessarily trademark infringement, defamatory, etc.
We have video replies and interviews with the comedian, Steph Broadbridge, and she said that Raygun's team instructed her to remove the kangaroo dance from the poster and the show, claiming that Raygun owns it. Those claims are made by Steph and the venue. Raygun's team have not confirmed or denied that as of yet. But my question for you is, can someone own a dance move?
You know what? In preparing for this interview, I actually got to be a law student again, and I looked into it, and yes, apparently you can.
Wow.
It's like a choreographer can own a set of moves, particularly for like a musical number or whatnot. So it is possible to own the dance move. Whether she owns it or doesn't own it, I don't know, but it is possible to own it.
In what area of law would that sort of be dealt with? How can then someone enforce their ownership of a dance move, for example?
Look, I think it'd be like enforcing the rights of a song, maybe, or like a written work. You would do it in that sort of fashion. You would take it to court and say, look, she's doing this particular dance and I did this particular dance. Look how similar they are. Look at the choreography. She's impinging upon my rights as an artist and the rights of the work.
Yeah. Indigenous commentators have kind of spoken about this over the past few days, and there's a lot of commentary online saying, how can she possibly own something like a kangaroo dance? How likely do you think the prospects of success could be for someone like Raygun asserting a legal right and ownership over the kangaroo dance move?
I'm going to give you the most lawyer answer ever, and it depends. It really depends on how well the case is articulated and how much she can show that that is a unique set of choreography that she basically formulated and used. From my understanding of, I guess, breakdancing, it's sort of building on other people's work all the time. And it seems like that's something that, may be subject to challenge.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff there. And I'm going to ask you another question that's probably going to elicit another lawyer response. I want to move on to the idea of creators portraying celebrities without their permission. So, off the top of my head, I'm thinking about Keating the Musical, which it's a comedy show about former Prime Minister Paul Keating. We also know of a stage show, Julia, about former Prime Minister Julia Gillard. That's less comedy, a bit more real-life depictions. But both of those works, those prime ministers were not involved in the production in any shape, way or form. So my question for you is, in what circumstances can a creator use the likeness of a celebrity or someone of notoriety without running into legal trouble?
Look, the easy answer is if they give you permission. If they say, hey, this is all good, you can do this, then you've got kind of a green light. And often it's not uncommon that they would be invited to the premiere or they would be told about it or they would, get their input into how this particular piece of work eventuated. That's sometimes the case with, unauthorized biographies, which ultimately receive permission to proceed. But the long and the short of it is a lawyer answer. It really depends. It depends on how far you go. It depends on whether it's defamatory or not. And what is one person's defamation is another person's satire. It's a very challenging area of the law because it forces us to look at things through both an objective and a subjective lens. And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of the commentary has been, satire and parody provides creators with a legal defense. And in this case, a lot of people are rooting for Steph. They're keen to have this show off the ground, to finally see this show kind of come to life. She has promised that the show will return with a new story arc, cheekily suggesting that the main character's name would still be Raygun, but spelt with an I instead of a Y. She's also issued somewhat of an apology on the project over the weekend.
I just want to say I'm really sorry for any negativity that you might have received as a result of this. I can promise you that was not my intention. It wasn't supposed to be nasty or done with any kind of malice.
Do these things help her case legally?
Well, look, the reality is she hasn't put on the musical. It's an interesting one in that I think that a big part of the case made by Raygun's team was that she owns the word Raygun, which I think it's subject to challenge at this moment. Why? I don't know. But a different named story about a different named breakdancer that isn't this particular person but goes on a similar sort of journey very well may be safe. It's a very fine balancing line. The reality is storytelling has been around forever and there's only so many types of stories. We just put in new characters. So I think it'll be a really interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, and interestingly, you talk about the fact that she hasn't put on the show. So that's a positive step for her legally. Let's say the musical didn't get pulled and it did go ahead. Who would be liable and what could they be facing?
Look, it depends on what happens in that musical, right? I mean, it could be completely innocent and there could be nothing to it. The cease and desist may have, worried about things that didn't come to fruition. Alternatively, it could be hyper defamatory. It could, portray severe imputations that are really damaging to the reputation, and then you've got an issue. So it really depends on what's in the musical, which we don't know. So we're kind of saying if this, then that.
And I just want to talk about more broadly, celebrities taking on smaller artists, creators and businesses is nothing new. That's something we've seen, especially here in Australia this year alone.
Absolutely.
We've seen Gina Reinhardt petition the National Gallery to remove a portrait of her that she didn't like. We've seen Sydney fashion designer Katy Perry, spelt with an I-E, not a Y, lose a trademark battle against pop star Katy Perry. And even back in 2020, we've seen pop star Sia petition an Adelaide council to remove a mural made in her likeness. I guess what I've chalked this up to is sometimes it's ego-driven. Other times these cases are driven by the fact that there are actual breaches or potential breaches of the law. From your reading of the situation, where do you think Raygun falls on the spectrum?
Look, I don't know Raygun personally. I don't know her management team. I don't know anything of her. And so I can't and wouldn't make any assertions about her character. What I will say is this. My understanding is that all of the funds of that particular event were going to go to a women's charity pertaining to, I think, survivors of domestic violence. I think there was artists coming from Canberra. It was 6 or 7 people. And it seemed to me to be something that cheeky and very Australian and quite larrikiny. And so it's sad to see that money raised for such a good cause in such a silly and Australian way didn't get to proceed.
Well, Jahan Kalantar, thank you so much for joining us again on The Briefing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Solicitor Jahan Kalantar there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. But before we go, we asked you in our Instagram broadcast channel what you thought about this whole ordeal, and there are a whole heap of interesting conversations, and we would love it if you could continue the conversation going on there. Just be sure to join it by following the prompts at The Briefing Podcast on Instagram. And don't forget, we'll be back in your feed tomorrow at 6 a.m. for headlines with Sash. But until then, I'm Chris Spyrou. Catch you next time.